Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Kaycee. Kaycee, thank you for making time. I'm looking at your face here on Zoom as we record this on video, and the smile is magnetic. So I know we're in for a great conversation. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah. So can you introduce yourself to the listeners, please, Kaycee?
Yeah, so my name is Kaycee Stanley. I live in Minnesota in the United States, and I am both an adoptive mom, a bio mom, and I run an organization that works kind of within the foster care and adoption community.
Yeah. Okay. So could you share a little bit about your story? Because we love hearing about people's stories, and often they're doing professionally, following their heart because they've been touched by adoption and they're into it and they want to do it professionally, and they're following their heart. So we love to hear stories. So can you tell us a little bit more about your story?
Yes, I'd love to. So I did not grow up in an adoptive or foster family, but I was surrounded by adopted kids. My best friend in elementary school was adopted. My youth pastor growing up through my church adopted a little girl, and I was kind of their main babysitter. So I kind of saw this girl grow up and just adored her with my whole heart, and just kind of felt like adoption was sort of interwoven through a lot of my social network. And it was always just something that I really felt called to. My faith is really important to me. And so for me, it felt like something that God was really directing me to. And so even when my husband and I were dating, I kind of told him at the time, I did not think I would ever have biological kids. I was just so passionate about adoption and felt like that was all I wanted to do, and kind of shared that with Pete, my now husband, and he was like on board. And so that was always kind of our plan. It was to build our family through adoption, and really wanted to adopt kids who needed to be adopted, kids who were waiting for families. And so we started to notice this trend after we'd been married for a little while. When people would ask us if we were going to have kids, we would say, yeah, we really want to adopt someday. And we would almost always get tons of support and enthusiasm and like, oh yeah, adoption, that's so great, that's so beautiful. And we loved that. But we found that when we were to add 3 magic words to the end of that statement, we would get a pretty different reaction. And those 3 magic words are from foster care. And when we would tell people that we wanted to adopt kids from foster care, sometimes the reaction would be more like, ooh, foster kids. I don't know, like, are you sure about that? And kind of, here's my horror story from my cousin's neighbor's uncle. And have you done your research, and all these things. And obviously that reaction came from a place of love for us, and people just wanted to know that we kind of knew what we were getting into. But it still broke our hearts a little bit that would be the way that that anybody would respond to kids who needed families. And so we just started dreaming and praying for a long time about how do we really change the narrative around adoption from foster care. For us, especially within the faith community, we both were always a part of churches and just had seen that every church we were part of had a huge heart for adoption, but always thought like adoption always meant international or babies, which are both beautiful, but like very little focus usually on like kids that are right here in our own state, in our own community. And so we just dreamed about how do we help to change that? And we didn't know. So we just kind of thought, well, we'll adopt, and that will be our little way of impacting our little sphere of influence. But then back in 2016, I went to a conference and heard some speakers talk about what they were doing in some different states. And they had started doing, in the state of Colorado, they had started doing videos of kids in the foster care system in Colorado who needed to be adopted. And I sat at this conference and was like lit on fire, like could not wait to get home, and was like, we could do this. We have the network to do this. We have the connections to do this. And so came home and talked to my husband and said, I want to start an organization that makes videos of kids in Minnesota who are waiting to be adopted. And we just kind of hit the ground running, and called our friend who was actually the videographer at our wedding and had had a ton of experience with kids, and asked him, hey, would you volunteer to do this? And he did. And we started reaching out to counties and agencies and just got the ball rolling. And it was really, really exciting. And so now we're a full-time 501c3 nonprofit. We have a staff of 6 people, and we're making videos of kids in Minnesota every week. And then it was also through that organization that we met our son.
Yeah.
Simon, do you want me to go into that?
Yeah.
He's
How old is your son? How old was your son
he
when you
will
met him?
be we met him when he was 12.
Right.
He'll be 16 in November.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and we met him through the Real Hope Project, through our
Yeah.
organization. We made his video back in 2018.
Right.
We had just gotten our license. We were, ready to begin the adoption process, and we're just kind of waiting to see who God would highlight, who we felt like we connected with. And then I went on a video shoot for this super cool kid named Martez, and just fell in love with him on his video shoot. Video shoots with kids who have been through a lot of trauma can be really challenging. And we're talking about something as personal and emotional as adoption, can just bring up a lot of hard things. And so usually at the end of a video shoot, I feel like kind of exhausted, like, okay, we did it, we made it. And I remember at the end of Martez's shoot, as his social worker took him away, just feeling like so sad and like he shouldn't be leaving. Like it just felt wrong that he would be leaving. And I just wanted to hang out with him for longer. So to me, that was like there's something there. And so we started pursuing learning more about him. And then he moved home in March of 2019, and then we were able to finalize his adoption just a few months later.
Wow.
So he starts sophomore year today. It's his first day of school today.
Fantastic. We have some, the unique stories on this show are great. The one that popped into my head, though, in terms of coincidences, was I interviewed a young lady called Princess, who's Canadian, and she was actually adopted by her therapist.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super unique.
That's super unique. And then we had another episode that was unique was another Canadian who she is a birth mother, and she is she now runs the agency that helped her place her son. So there's some great stories.
Yeah.
Great stories. We uncover some unique stories, which I love. So before we started recording, we were talking about what we're going to talk about, and how the listeners are curious. Like adoptive and foster parents, people that listen to the show are curious. If they're not curious, they're not listening. Yeah. So, and one of the things that they are very curious about is how adoptees feel and how kids feel. And, obviously kids, we can't, when I was a kid, I wasn't really one for talking about my emotions and how I feel. So, and kids often, sometimes don't want to open up. So I wondered, could you share some of the insights that you've had into what's going on in these kids' minds and in their hearts? How you're blessed to come across all these fantastic kids. What is it that you learn from them about what's going on for them?
Yeah. I remember that one of the moments that was really eye-opening for me pretty early on when we started the Real Hope Project was my perception was that every kid who's waiting to be adopted, like they're so excited to be adopted and they can't wait, and they just sit around all day and they just think about like, what's my dream family going to be? And I do really believe that deep in their heart, every kid is wanting a forever family and permanent home. And absolutely, I think that's true. But I think I underestimated the pain that a lot of these kids are feeling in losing their birth family. And so I remember interviewing this girl for her video, and I asked her in this really kind of tone deaf way, probably. I asked her, like, okay, so what would your dream family look like? If you could design your dream family, what would it be? And she said, well, my family, like the family I came from. I just wish they would have been able to take care of me. And I was like, oh man, yes, of course, that makes sense. And so just seeing that there is both like this desire for home and family and a place to belong, and the heartbreak that these kids are feeling from losing what they originally had is just more deeper and all consuming than I think I could ever understand as someone who hasn't been through that. And so that's something we've learned to approach a lot more delicately. And rather than ask kids like, design your dream family, we kind of will ask them like, what is a family? How would you explain what a family is to an alien? Or like, how do you explain what adoption is to a kindergartner? You know, and like help them articulate it in a way that's less personal and less maybe brings up some of their own trauma and heartbreak, because I think I underestimated that for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, did you take that learning into, you know, your own son?
Yes. Yeah, I feel really blessed because I was running our organization for a few years before our son came home. And so that was really helpful because I was pretty like deeply invested in the foster care adoption world and got to learn a lot before he came home, which has helped us in just how we approach that. I think before I was really involved in this world, I would have been very guarded, I think, about talking about his birth mom or his birth siblings. And I think I would have felt like, well, if we acknowledge that, then it's going to make him feel separate from us or not really a part of our family. And so I think my instinct would have been like sort of hunker down and no, it's just us. It's just the three of us. And learning that and seeing that through kids, and we have really wonderful social workers that we work with that have helped to kind of coach us in a lot of this, has helped me understand like, no, he needs that to be acknowledged. He thinks about that. That's a part of his story. For a long time, that was a part of his story. He wasn't, adopted at infancy or 2 years old. He knew his birth family for a long time. And so that has really helped to inform my approach, that we talk about birth mom on Mother's Day and on holidays. What did you do, when you were with mom? What did you do when you were with grandma and grandpa? Just really always trying to make sure that he feels free to talk about that.
Yeah.
And then also just trying to give him, it's hard to do because he's 15 right now. And so what level of freedom and control can you give to a 15-year-old? But just knowing that so much of his life did feel totally out of his control. And now he's 15 and we have all these rules, and that feels really controlling. And so just like navigating that is really tricky for any parent of a teenager. But especially when there's been like trauma in the history, and that just kind of adds to it. So we've tried to really think creatively about like what types of control can we give to our son that will allow him to like not feel totally like everything that happens in his life is not under his control. Does that make sense?
Kinda. Yeah. I think it's something that it's one of those, I said this on recording a podcast yesterday, right? I listen to podcasts and some of them just want to know the hows. Everybody's kind of obsessed with the hows and the strategies and trying to rationalize it all. And like there's one way, and it's just like, it's just like, this to me just sounds like something that you get a feel for.
Yeah.
It's something that you learn by trial and error. And it's the metaphor that came to my mind about 30 seconds ago was the high wire act, the guy on the high wire act, with the bar out in front of them. And for those listening at home, folks, remember there is a safety net under this high wire. Okay. But the high wire, the guy in the high wire, or girl, is actually never rock solid. They're always slightly out of balance. They're always just tweaking and twisting as they're going along. And we're trying to live our lives without, just, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to head straight for there. I know exactly what I'm doing. Whereas we're always, that's not how life is. It is always slightly out of balance. And that is life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that my husband and I have struggled with. So Tez is our first kid. We've never parented another kid before. And so I feel like we have just ping ponged back and forth between like really permissive parenting and then like, okay, that's not working. So now we need to like tighten everything down, and then like very authoritative parenting, and then that's not working. And then we swing back, and like finding that tight wire balance is not an easy thing. I think one of the things that's been just a practical help to us is also realizing like what our son's goals and motivations are rather than what our goals are for him. And so we kind of set these like grade standards of like, these are what your grades need to be. And if you have these grades, then you can do your screen time and your Xbox time, whatever. Like we thought we had this great system figured out. And eventually he told us, my goal is to not flunk out. Like, I don't care if I have A's and B's, but I don't want to flunk out. And us like really pushing him to have our goals and like to achieve what we thought he should achieve and that he can achieve. He's very smart.
Okay.
But it was just causing all kinds of friction and all kinds of tension. And it was like, okay, trying to get him to want what we want is not working. And so we need to like pay attention to what his goals are and support him in that, and like then be willing to kind of let things go from there for the time being.
Can I turn that into a teaching point, not for you, but for the listeners, right?
Yeah.
Before I did this adoption stuff, I used to do a lot of work in elementary schools. And my starting point with the kids after, so it was about kids' happiness and confidence and resilience. That's the sort of things I do. Social and emotional learning, but some people might call it. And after 2 or 3 sessions, I worked with 1,600 kids in total. But after 2 or 3 sessions, so after I'd worked with maybe 60 or 90, I stumbled on a way to get them really engaged very quickly, like instantaneously. And that was about asking them what they wanted. What was their dream for the future? So when you said about the dream family, I thought, well, that's kind of, yeah, okay, I can get that. But, you know, ask them I would ask the kids what their dream is. And then make the rest of the session about helping them achieve what they wanted.
Yeah.
Because you talked about control. I think the PC term for this is agency at the moment, right? It's kind of softer than control, right?
Yeah.
So kids do not have agency,
right,
at school, for example. You know, the school system is about churning, whether it's in the UK, when it's in the US, it's about churning out people with academic stuff. You know, that is by far the priority. So they don't have any agency during the day. They don't have any control. And, you know, you talked about your son not feeling control and trying to give him control, and that fine art. But the best way to engage kids that I found was to find out what they want and support them towards that, to do that. And as one of my mentors once said, enthusiasm does for people what hot air does to balloons. You know, like it rises.
Yeah.
It rises. And then what's happening in the kind of in some of the adoption and fostering community is we've got all these negative people trying to throw rocks into the basket of our balloon to take us down. You know, so be careful. You know, again, we were talking about this before we started recording. Be careful who you kind of like you listen to, because like even your friends, they were trying to, you said that they were coming from love, but you had this dream of adopting you from foster care, and they were trying to tell you not to do it. And you just think, yeah. And I found that actually, I used to focus in on that with my sessions with kids as well, is empowering them to ignore the naysayers, because that's got to be one of the biggest things that we can do for our kids is
I totally agree.
Ignore the naysayers and ignore the rise above the kids that are bullying them. I was bullied pretty badly as a kid. Nothing to do with being adopted, but because my teeth stuck out. And anyway, right. So those are the biggest things that we can do. The easiest way to get your kid on board, or to get the kid to open a dialogue, is find out what they want, not what you want. So So you talked about, sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, was that?
That was great. Can I speak to that really quick?
Of course you can, yeah.
Yes, I love your heart in that, and I totally agree. And I've learned a lot, and I understand that adoption is really complex, and there's some hard things, and we need to be aware of that. But sometimes the community has become so negative and so much rock throwing that it is super deflating. One thing that I have seen is like my family. So I have a couple siblings and my mom and dad, and they're not like adoption informed people, like they haven't done any of the classes that I have that I did, or like they don't know all the right lingo to say all the time. They're not the most PC group that you've ever met, but my goodness, they love my kid, like they love him so much. He has his first football game tonight and both my brothers are coming to cheer him on. Like they love him, and their enthusiasm for him matters so much more, so much. He feels that so much more than people just saying all the right words all the time, or like acknowledging every possible complexity within his story or whatever. It's like that, sure, that could be great.
Yeah.
But what matters more is like he is so loved and they're so excited about him. And that's what I care about more than everybody like knowing all the right things to say.
We're on my favorite subject here, right? So adoptees, kids, people, all of us, we don't want therapy, we want love.
Yeah.
We don't want to think good, we want to feel good.
Yeah.
And people say, oh yeah, people in the adoption community, adoption professionals say to me things like, oh well, people think they think that love's enough, and I often say to them, well, it's a pretty good start.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I've said this before on some of the podcasts, but I'll share it with you because we've never spoken before. But do you know? You said enthusiasm, right? You said they're enthusiastic, right? So do you know the origin of the word enthusiasm?
No.
Okay, so this is one that you can share with your husband because he's a pastor, right?
No, he's not. But
he's not a pastor. Where did I get that from? Sorry,
I was a youth pastor. Maybe that's
you were a youth pastor. Okay,
yeah, and right. He was a volunteer. That's how we met.
Volunteer. Okay, so like Theo, like theology, right? Theos means God, right? And Theos is the God within, right? So that's what we're doing when we're being enthusiastic. We're releasing the God within.
Huh. I like
cool,
that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I don't know where I picked these things up for, but I do.
Yeah, it's a good little nugget.
You got a little nugget. So 10 minutes ago, you said that you learned a lot of things when you started the Real project. You learned a lot of things. So what else did you learn that helped you change your perspective, right? So Thriving Adoptees podcast is all about changing people's perspective by sharing perspective, right? So what was it that helped you? What was it that you learned that helped you that you'd like to share with others listening?
Yes, I think one of the things that I've learned is, this maybe sounds really obvious, but just that connection and relationship is like the foundation of all health in the world. And my husband and I went to, have you ever heard of the Empowered to Connect conference with Karen Purvis? The Connected Child is a book she wrote.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I started reading or listening to the book. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We went to that conference, and that was just really helpful in just understanding that like building connection with your kid is the most important thing. The behavior management and all of that can become the focus really easily. But like connection is really what matters most. And so just seeing, like, our goal at the Real Help Project is to find a family for every kid who's waiting for a family. And sometimes what that ends up looking like is different than what I expected it to. I remember one kid who never officially was adopted by this family because he turned 18. There was like some complexities. He turned 18 before they could get through the licensing and whatever. And he was just feeling really hesitant about adoption. But this family was like, we just want to be connected to you. Like, we want to have a relationship with you. We want to take you camping with us. We want you to come on family trips. Like, even if we don't officially label it or do the paperwork or whatever. And just learning, like, I think Forever Family is like the ideal. But also when that can't happen, like to celebrate even when connections are being made and when relationships are being built, to just always be celebrating when kids are more connected to people who love them, all across the board. So with families who are fostering and who are adopting, and then also with celebrating birth family connections, whenever that is a healthy thing and a doable thing. We just last weekend went and saw my son's, he has two sisters, one of whom he hasn't seen since she was born, like 5 years ago. And just seeing that, like, that was really important for him to just be able to see her and know that she was okay and she's in a healthy home and she's got a mom who loves her. Like I mentioned, I think there was a time when I would feel really like, no, we're not even gonna maybe acknowledge that. And just seeing like those connections are so important and healing for him. And as long as they're healthy, we're gonna pursue that. And so that's been a huge thing that I've learned. And then also just knowing how important community is, like other people who are walking through adoption and foster care who can walk alongside you, because it's such a weird thing. Most people don't do it. And it's a all-consuming thing. It's not just like, oh, I play pickleball on the weekends. It's like your whole life is impacted by it. And we, through our church, we have an incredible adoption community that we meet with, and that's been so sustaining for us. And through Real Hope, we've just seen that a lot of families don't have that, and or if they do, it sometimes can take on sometimes a little bit of a more negative or toxic edge. And so just having a group of people that are like celebrating with us and walking with us has been like a game changer, I think, for us in our process.
Okay. I'm just going to throw in another little nugget to show how off some people can be. I was accused of toxic positivity a couple of months ago.
I hate that term.
So be careful. Connect with good people who are in
Yes.
a good place. Connect
Yes.
with good people. You were mentioning how the in-person connection, the in-person groups that you've been part of have been wholly superior and wholly more enthusiastic and supportive than the online.
Yes.
We mentioned this quite a lot on the show, is like, be careful who you knock around with, and be careful who you take your lead from, because I think one of the reasons I say this, Kaycee, is because I don't know whether it's just me or not, but I'm quite suggestible, right? I was brought up really honest, so I tend to believe. I take people at face value, and I tend to believe people, and it sometimes gets me into trouble because I kind of like to believe what they say, and perhaps I should be a little bit more questioning. So I'm probably saying to the listeners the message that I need to hear for myself.
So I've had, our in-person, I don't think we were recording when I mentioned this. Our in-person community has been phenomenal. And I joined a few online adoptive parent communities and left after a day because it was so negative. And I'm not saying that those people aren't being truthful or honest, but it was not helpful for me to be reading through those things and then interpreting everything my kid does through, oh no, is he going to do that thing that other kid did? Like, it just brought up tons of fear, and it was not helpful to me.
No. The one the phrase I came up with a couple of weeks ago was like, it's okay to be, let's be trauma informed, but let's not be trauma obsessed, because trauma is a dark hole, and obsessing with it doesn't always lead us to the light at the end of the tunnel. It can just get darker and darker there, and some of these groups are pretty dark, and they will pin everything. Because we're obviously, I'm not an adoptive parent, I'm not in an adoptive parents groups, but I've been in adoptee groups, and it's basically people throwing out their problems in life, saying, I've got this problem, is it down to being adopted? And I'm looking at these things, and I'm thinking, no, it's not. It's a human option. It's not it's a human issue. It's not an adoption issue. However, I wouldn't dare say that, because I would get flamed by everybody in the group for doing that. So what happens is that people agree with them, and that validates them. And we're all looking for validation, but that sort of validation, to me, cements the trauma.
Yes. Yes.
It makes the dark darker.
Yes.
And and it's really misleading.
Yes.
Really misleading. We don't want to be. Yeah. People talk to me about peer-to-peer group, and I say, well, yeah, have you seen some of them? I've been in some Zoom. I've been in some Zoom communities, right, with adult adoptees, and I'm just thinking, no, I'm sorry, I can't. I don't think. I share some stuff, and some of them want to. So as they something, oh yeah, somebody says, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay, yeah, I kind of get that. I can get but in terms of me from them, I'm just thinking, no, this isn't working. This isn't great.
Yeah. That's one of the things that can really frustrate with me with my kid, because he can be so resilient sometimes, and other times he's like any teenager, just like, wow, wants to give up. But like, what are we doing when we constantly tell him and other adoptees, like, well, this is because of trauma that already happened, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's going to impact you forever. I feel like it does not build resilience in kids. Yes, process your trauma, and that is a part of your story, absolutely, but that's not the definition of who you are. And telling my kid that, like, that's the main piece of who he is not building resilience in him. Like, that's only going to lead to discouragement and negativity. Yeah. So I'm with you. I agree. It's like, there's a balance, of course, but I feel that we're out of balance a lot of the time in the negative direction.
Yeah. So we're on to my favorite topic here, right? Identity. So you said trauma isn't who your son is, I think. Did you say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah. So to explain more, because there might be some curious people listening, but there might be some people that are really at the end of their tether, all right? And they're listening to this episode and they're thinking, well, that's great for Simon and Kaycee. That's great for Martez, but my son or my daughter's really struggling. And, his trauma does, it is the key part of his story. And I can't see a way out. And I wish they would give me a set of keys.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Gosh, first of all, I would say that I'm sorry. And I know that that's super hard, and like, yeah, so hard when it doesn't feel like there's a way out or a way toward healing. I think that, yeah, it is important to acknowledge that the trauma is real, and that impacts your kid in all kinds of ways. I also don't believe that it helps anyone, me or you or your kid, when we say that trauma is insurmountable or unhealable. And I know everybody believes differently about this. For me, my faith is a big part of it, where I believe there is no wound that God can't heal. I believe God rose someone from the dead. So I obviously think emotional, and even physical and mental wounds can be healed. And so for me, it's like, even in those moments of darkness, I think my faith is a big part of, like, I believe that this can be healed, and we will work through it. And it might take a long time, but reminding my kid who he is, and that you are loved and you are mine, and here's some of the things I love about you. We had kind of a big blow up a couple weeks ago, just kind of like a teenage tantrum kind of moment, and he was not coming out of his room. And so I wrote him a letter and just said, I love you, and like, here's some of the things that I love most about you. And I don't know what's going on, but I hope you decide to talk about it, and like slipped it under his door. And then my husband did the same thing. And I think that reminder of, like, this big blow up we just had is not our whole relationship, and is not who you are. I think we all need to hear that. And I also think that sometimes when kids have been through really hard things, they internalize that as their own fault, even when that's not true. And so when we keep focusing on it and focusing on it and focusing on it, sometimes I worry that that just drills a kid deeper and deeper into, well, this, I couldn't live with my family because it's my fault and I did this thing, and just kind of continues to bring more and more harm. So I think for me, I try to call out like who my son is, um, acknowledging the trauma is there and that that's going to be a challenge, but not something that can't be healed. I just don't believe that's a healthy, helpful perspective.
Okay.
I hope that's not insensitive. It maybe is. I maybe just made people mad, but
I don't think so.
okay.
I think they get your heart. I'm gonna have a go at this as well.
Yeah.
So my view on this is pretty counter to pretty much everybody else's view. So if listeners that this is upsets you, Kaycee's upset you, I'm sorry. Okay, but I'm giving you a warning. This is right. I think kids are born to bounce back. I think resilience is unveiled. It's not strengthened.
Yeah.
It's not strengthened. People say, well, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger? And I say, well, yeah, it kind of makes us stronger, but it only makes us stronger because by revealing the strength that we all always had.
Mm.
So it's not like going to the gym. But there's all these people out there trying to sell us resilience training courses, saying that they can strengthen our resilience, but they can't. And they can't, but they don't need to. So kids are born to bounce back. So my metaphor for this is well, it's not my metaphor, it's a metaphor from a mentor of mine, and it's nothing to do with adoption. He's just a guy that's into practical spirituality. He says most people believe that they are like a china doll. So if you knock a china doll off the mantelpiece, it's going to shatter into a million pieces. Or they are a piece of china that's fallen off, landed on a carpet, and is being held together by Scotch tape or super glue or one of those things. But I don't really see us like that. I see us like that. I see the human spirit as like a rubber ball, right? So we're born to bounce. We're born to bounce back.
Yeah.
But we think it's a kind of mistaken identity. We think with the China doll, we think that we're kind of, and we think, and treating kids like they're wounded, like they're broken, will just exacerbate the situation or make it worse. If we think that they're wounded and we treat them like they're wounded, then they're going to feel wounded and they're going to believe that they're wounded, and it's just going to be very disempowering.
Yeah.
And one of the because this is kind of what I did to myself, really, or what my ego did. So I read The Primal Wound, the Nancy Verrier book about adoption, and I thought that until then I didn't think that I didn't feel wounded, but I read the book, and then I thought I was, because I'm susceptible, I'm gullible, I take stuff in. But now I see, well, kind of we're not wounded, because that human spirit, I believe that we're fundamentally unwoundable. So we can have, thoughts and feelings come and go, feelings of sensitivity, feelings of fragility, feelings of insecurity, feelings that we're not good enough, feelings like the thought that I am at fault, that kind of comes and goes. But underneath those transient thoughts and feelings is that spiritual being, that rubber ball of resilience that's born to bounce back.
Yeah, I love that. And that just needs to be called out in kids.
Yeah, well, they need to see it for themselves, you see.
Yeah.
So you talked about telling Martez that that you love him no matter what. So kids need to know that, and they also need to see it for them. But they need to see that for themselves.
Yeah.
So it's not about what we say to them; it's about what they hear, and it's not about what we point out; it's what they see. So
yeah,
I'm into a bit of a lecture mode here, I guess. I don't know, but this is we're talking on topic. So
yeah, I love that. And I just think about any kid, like when you're a kid and you're forming kind of your identity and the way you see yourself. Uh, all kids are like super bipolar in that way. I feel like, like kids are like, I'm going to be a movie star. I'm going to be in the NFL. I'm going to whatever. And then one bad day and they're like, I have no friends and I suck and I'm the worst, like all over the place. And I think that's pretty typical. I see that in my kid. And so I think like we get to be parents who remind kids, not like every kid's going to be a movie star and be in the NFL, but like we're helping to kind of center kids on like, yeah, the beauty that is in them, and like I love that, like the rubber ball inside of them that exists, and to just keep like peeling back the layers to help them to see that. I think that's a cool analogy.
Yeah. And the fact that you'll love them whether they're a movie star or not, and that they are enough. This is the biggest thing I think that we can all see, that we are enough. And I say this from the perspective of a guy who hasn't felt that he is enough a lot. So we don't think that we are good enough.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you about, I'm just conscious of time as well. What I wanted to ask you about was vulnerability and sharing how you feel with Martez. How because you're talking earlier on, and seemed to be a lot of openness and a lot of acknowledgement, and I'm just wondering how open are you with Martez in terms of your own emotions around the adoption and stuff?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that. I think we try to be really thoughtful in how open we are. Like, I don't want my kid to have to bear every burden that I'm bearing, and like that wouldn't be healthy, I don't think, to process every feeling I have all the time. But we've also just tried to be really honest when we don't necessarily know what to do, or when we've messed up as parents, to just say to him, like, we've never done this before. So we tried this and it doesn't seem like it's working. So we're going to change course and like, let's talk about a new plan for how we want to handle this. Yeah, I feel like in that way, we try to be super open. I think I try not to express every fear I have to him. Like, I think it's easy, it's difficult as an adoptive parent to not always get caught in the loop of like, okay, this behavior is happening. Is that because he's a teenager? Is that because he's a teenage boy? Is that just a Martez thing? Is that an adoption thing, a trauma thing? Like, you can just like go nuts. And it's impossible to ever know. And
does it matter?
Right. Totally. I spend so much time on it. It's like, who cares? It's happening. Move on. And so I think because I get stuck in that mental loop, sometimes it'll bring up all kinds of fear of like, oh, is this trauma related and we need to figure that out? Or is this some kind of adoption thing? And I try to not be super honest with him about that, because I don't want to confuse his own processing and his own identity. And it doesn't matter. What matters is how he's feeling and who he is. So I don't know. I feel like that's not a very clear answer. I need to think more about that. But yeah, we try to be open in our own vulnerability in terms of our parenting.
The thing that I would pick from that is like, you're kind of you're showing Martez that it's okay not to know, and it's okay to mess up, and it's okay to change plans. Changing our mind, for example, has got a bad rep, hasn't it? But What if we change our mind for the better?
Yeah.
What if some of my greatest moments are when I laugh about how rubbish I believed the rubbish in my head, for example. Changing your mind is seen as a bad thing, but like I think that to me sounded great, because then you kind of you're not raising another perfectionist.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, the world needs less perfectionists.
Yes. And I love that, because one of the lessons that I really learned from my mom, she would always say, choose to laugh. Like when you're mad about something, like if there's a way to find joy and laughter in it, take it. And so that's been good to, like, when we have messed up, I love that, just like laughing at ourselves and like, well, that did not work out. Okay. And modeling for our kid, like, you're going to mess up and it doesn't have to be humiliating. It can be like, oh my gosh, goofy. And then we're moving on.
That's cool. So as we're coming up to time, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Obviously, we'll put links into the Real project in the show notes and in your social, so people can check you out, especially if they're in Minnesota. 50 ladies and gentlemen of the listeners. I'm sorry, that wasn't PC enough. Listeners. I'm non-binary, listeners. We 57% of the people that listen to this show are actually in the US. So, is there anything you'd like to close off with, Kaycee?
I would just say that anything worth doing has hard moments, and just know that there is joy and there's healing, even in the hard moments. So, I wish everyone the best.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much, Simon. I appreciate it.
You're a star. Thanks a lot, listeners. See you again soon. Bye-bye.